Imagine being told you are nothing more than a burden, only to be handed over to a stranger as punishment. Yet what waits at the end of that dirt road is not despair, but a secret life, hidden wealth, and a love that could change everything. This is not just a tale of survival. It's a real-life journey of transformation, forgiveness, and hope. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The afternoon sky was heavy with gray clouds rolling slowly across the hills. A storm seemed close, but inside the Donnelly house, the air was already heavy. Patrick Donnelly sat at the kitchen table, shoulders slouched, hands wrapped around a chipped cup that smelled strongly of liquor. His eyes were tired, not from work alone, but from years of carrying grief and regret. Mira Donnelly stood near the sink, her fingers tracing the edge of a cracked bowl. She was a quiet young woman, soft in voice and round in shape, used to silence and shadows. Her life had been marked by whispers of shame, words that followed her like stones in a pocket. She had heard them for so long that they seemed like part of the air she breathed. Patrick's voice broke the silence. It was flat, almost careless. "Someone's coming for you by sunset," he said. "You'll leave with him." Mira turned slowly, her eyes searching her father's face. "What do you mean?" she asked, though deep down she already feared the answer. "A farmer," Patrick muttered. "Rowan Hale says he needs help. He doesn't want money. He'll take you in." He took another long drink and did not look at her. The words struck her chest like cold rain. It was not an offer. It was not a choice. It was a decision made without her voice. She was to be sent away, handed over as if her presence in this house was nothing more than a burden too heavy to carry. Mira's throat tightened, but she did not cry. She had taught herself long ago that tears only made things worse. Instead, she turned toward the small shelf in the corner. A framed photograph sat there, its edges curling with age. It was her mother, smiling softly, eyes kind and patient. Mira whispered under her breath, "You wouldn't let this happen." Patrick heard and gave a bitter laugh. "Your mother was too soft. Look where that got her." Gone. The sound of his voice echoed against the wooden walls, sharp and hollow. Mira felt a crack inside, but she did not speak again. She went to her room and pulled an old satchel from under the bed. She filled it with what little she owned: 2 worn dresses, a sweater with mended elbows, a hairbrush missing half its teeth, and the small photo of her mother. She placed the photo carefully at the top, as if it could shield her from what waited ahead. Outside, the clouds thickened. The porch creaked as she stepped onto it, bag in hand. The air smelled of rain that had not yet fallen. At the edge of the yard stood an old truck, its engine idling low. Beside it was a tall man with sun-browned skin and a wide straw hat shading his face. His clothes were simple: jeans, boots, and a faded blue shirt, but clean. His posture was steady, his expression unreadable. This was Rowan Hale, the farmer her father had spoken of. He raised a hand, not a wave, just a quiet sign of greeting. Mira hesitated, her sandals pressed against the loose wooden planks of the porch. One plank shifted, and she stumbled slightly, her heart leaping. Rowan moved closer, but he did not grab her. Instead, he held out his hands in open air, steady and calm. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was gentle, even, like the calm before a storm. Mira blinked through the sting in her eyes. No one had ever asked her that question like it mattered. She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. She could not find the words. Rowan gave the faintest smile, not forced, just honest. He opened the truck door and stepped back. "Your choice," he said quietly. Mira looked over her shoulder one last time. Her father stood in the doorway, half hidden by shadow, pouring another drink. He did not meet her eyes. There was nothing left to hold on to. She tightened her grip on the satchel strap and stepped forward. The truck rumbled down the dirt road, carrying her away from everything she had known. At first, she braced herself for emptiness, for broken fences and silence. But as the road curved, fields stretched wide, filled with tall sunflowers bending toward the light. Their yellow faces seemed to glow against the gray sky, bright and alive. Rowan drove without speaking much, but every so often he glanced her way, not at her body, not with judgment, only with quiet acknowledgement. And that, for the moment, was enough. When the house came into view, Mira felt her breath catch. It was small, wooden, with a porch wrapped in wind chimes and wicker chairs. Herbs hung by the windows, and a path of flat stones led to the door. It was not grand, but it felt alive. Rowan parked and stepped out, waiting. He did not rush to pull her bag. He only said, "Water's inside. The room on the left is yours. Rest first, work later." His words were plain, but they carried a weight she had never heard before. Respect. Mira stepped across the threshold, unsure, afraid, but also curious. In the quiet of that small house, something shifted inside her. For the first time in many years, she wondered if perhaps she had not been sent away to be discarded. Perhaps she had been sent here to begin, and with that, the handoff was complete. But the real story had only just begun. Morning in the Hale farmhouse arrived softly. Light streamed through thin curtains, carrying the scent of herbs that hung above the kitchen sink. The air was fresher here, touched by earth and dew. Mira opened her eyes slowly, uncertain of where she was, until she saw the small photo of her mother on the windowsill. She remembered the long road, the sunflowers, and the man named Rowan, who had spoken few words but carried them with steady calm. She stepped into the kitchen quietly. The wooden floor creaked, but it was a friendly sound. Rowan was already at the table, drinking from a plain mug. "Morning," he said. His voice was not commanding, not judging. It was a simple greeting, but it felt like an invitation to stay. He pointed to a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "Nona Vale brought this by yesterday," he explained. "She runs the cafe in town. Says she leaves bread when she wants to know how someone's doing." Mira sat, breaking off a small piece. The bread was warm and sweet, nothing like the stale slices she had grown used to at her father's house. For the first time in a long time, breakfast felt like more than survival. It felt like care. The day unfolded slowly. Rowan walked with her through the garden that stretched behind the house. Rows of herbs leaned toward the sun. Sunflowers nodded gently in the breeze. The soil was dark, rich, and alive. He bent down, scooping some into his hand. "Soil remembers," he said. "It remembers what you give it, and it gives back in time." Mira listened carefully. She had never thought of land as something that could hold memory. Her own life had been shaped by words that bruised and silences that cut deep. But here, under the wide sky, she wondered if maybe her story could change the way soil does after rain. Later that week, Nona herself arrived, her apron dusted with flour, her laughter spilling into the kitchen like sunlight. She carried a basket, filled with pastries and jars of honey. "So you're the new neighbor," she said warmly, handing Mira a bun. "You'll learn quickly that this town watches out for its own." Mira was not sure how to respond, so she simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Nona grinned. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll eat more than crumbs." Strength grows from more than soil. It grows from feeding yourself well. After Nona left, Mira sat on the porch, nibbling the bun. For years, she had believed food was her shame, proof of her weakness. But here, it was different. Food was laughter, bread shared, life sustained. The shame she carried felt a little lighter, like a coat slipping from her shoulders. As the days passed, Mira began to help in small ways. She watered the sunflowers in the early mornings, her bare feet pressing into the damp earth. She carried herbs to the kitchen, learning how to hang them to dry. Sometimes she sat on the porch steps and read from the old books Rowan kept on the shelf, volumes on farming, cooking, and poetry. She whispered the lines softly, as if the words might scatter into the air and take root. Yet every so often, he would glance her way with a nod, a small sign that her presence mattered. It was not loud affection, but it was enough to remind her she was seen. One evening, Mira tried to cook supper. She followed a recipe from one of the books, but the soup burned quickly, filling the kitchen with smoke. Her heart raced with panic. She had ruined something, and the old fear of being scolded returned. Rowan walked in, sniffed the air, and smiled gently. "Smells like my first stew," he said. "Except mine set the whole pan black. You just charred dinner." Mira froze, then let out a small laugh. It was quiet, shaky, but real. No one had ever met her mistakes with humor and patience. The moment was small, but it planted something deep, like a seed pressed into good soil. As summer days stretched, she noticed her clothes growing loose. She did not see it as loss, but as release. She no longer hid her arms under heavy sleeves. She began humming while she worked in the garden. The notes, simple, but filled with life. One afternoon, Rowan handed her a packet of sunflower seeds. "Plant these," he said. "Not too deep, not too shallow. Let the roots feel safe." Mira crouched, pressing each seed gently into the soil. Her fingers were clumsy, but her heart was steady. She whispered to the seeds as she covered them. She was not sure why, but she believed maybe kindness mattered to even the smallest things. Watching her, Rowan tilted his head. "Soil remembers," he repeated, "and so do people." Mira felt her chest tighten. For years, she had carried words that cut deep, but here, in this garden, among sunflowers and kind voices, she began to hope that maybe her heart could remember new words too. Words like welcome, words like enough. The land around her seemed to agree. Sunflowers swayed, the air smelled of rosemary and warm bread, and for the first time, Mira did not feel like a burden handed away. She felt like a seed, planted in soil that promised growth. Her real-life journey was no longer about survival. It was about discovering that even broken soil can bloom again, and so can she. The summer air was warm, and the garden hummed with life. Sunflowers stood tall. Bees drifted lazily from bloom to bloom, and Mira moved through the rows with a calm she had never known before. Her days had become simple and steady. She baked bread with Nona's recipes, taught Piper and Tom, the neighbor's children, how to water seedlings, and laughed more often than she ever thought possible. Still, in quiet moments, questions tugged at her. There was something about Rowan Hale that did not quite fit. His farmhouse was modest, his clothes plain, yet he carried himself with the ease of a man who had once held more. Sometimes she caught him staring at old letters or walking out to the mailbox with thick envelopes he never explained. He always brushed it aside, saying, "Just farm business." But part of her wondered. One bright afternoon, while she was trimming sunflowers near the fence, she saw a car turn up the lane. It was not like the dusty farm trucks that passed sometimes. This was a sedan, its paint dulled by travel but still out of place on the dirt road. A man stepped out, tall, thin, with a leather satchel and a notepad in hand. He introduced himself as Ellis Ford, a writer. Rowan's face tightened when he saw him, though his voice stayed even. "You said this was off the record," Rowan murmured, almost to himself. Ellis smiled politely, but his eyes were sharp. "Just a few questions. People are curious when a man disappears and then reappears on a quiet farm." Mira brought out lemonade, trying to be polite, though the tension made her uneasy. As she handed Ellis a glass, a folded paper slipped from his satchel and fell to the porch. She bent to pick it up. Her eyes landed on the headline before she could stop herself. The words struck her breathless. Rowan Hale, former land magnate, steps away after scandal. Beneath it was a photograph. Rowan in a suit shaking hands with a senator, his smile polished and practiced. The article spoke of land holdings, board positions, and a corporate collapse that left his name in every paper years ago. Mira's hands trembled as she held the clipping. She looked at the man who had taught her how to plant seeds, who had laughed at burnt soup, who had spoken with such quiet patience. He was not just a farmer. He was someone who had once lived another life entirely, and he had never told her. She placed the paper on the table. Her voice was low but steady. "You were never going to tell me." Rowan stood, his face full of regret. "I was going to," he said quietly, "but not like this." Mira felt the heaviness rise in her chest. She walked inside without another word. Her hands moved quickly, packing her dresses, folding them into the old satchel. She lifted the photo of her mother, her fingers brushing the frame as tears blurred her vision. She was not sure if the tears came from anger, betrayal, or heartbreak. Perhaps all of them at once. Rowan appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Please listen," he said softly. "You were never a project to me. You were never a way to hide from the past." She turned, her voice shaking. "Then what was I? A chance for you to feel better about yourself? A way to fix what you broke before?" His jaw tightened. "You were the first person who made me feel human again. Not a failure, not a headline, just a man." Her breath caught. His words cut through, but the hurt was still raw. "I let myself believe you were simple," she whispered. "Someone like me. Now I don't know what's real." He stepped closer, though he kept his distance, as if afraid of breaking what little trust remained. "You are real," he said firmly. "The way you laugh when you think no one hears. The way you hold a seed like it's precious. The way you believed you could never make something grow. And then you did. That's real." Silence filled the room. Mira stared at her hands, still dusted with soil from the garden. Her heart ached, but her suitcase remained half-zipped. She did not know whether to leave or stay. Rowan's voice broke the silence once more. "I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you're real." Rough edges, laughter, mistakes, all of it. Like this land, it remembers scars, but it still grows. Mira turned slowly, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to leave, to protect herself from more pain, but she also wanted to believe him. She did not unpack. She did not finish packing either. Instead, she placed the suitcase by the door and stepped outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. She walked through the rows of sunflowers, their petals glowing in the fading light. She bent down, touching one bloom gently, remembering the day she planted its seed. Rowan stood a few feet behind, silent, waiting. Mira whispered to herself, "Soil remembers." Then she stood tall, her heart torn but not closed. She did not forgive yet. She did not forget. But she allowed herself to believe there might be space for growth again. The truth had shaken her, but the story was not over. This was not an ending. It was a fragile beginning, built on honesty, waiting to see if it could bloom. Autumn arrived slowly, painting the fields in gold and rust. Mornings grew cooler, and the wind carried the smell of ripe apples and wood smoke. Mira's days on the farm had settled into rhythm, yet the space between her and Rowan still held an edge. After the truth came out, trust had become cautious, tender, like a seedling that could break if pressed too hard. Still, the land pulled her forward. She worked in the garden with steady hands, taught children from town how to plant seeds in painted jars, and discovered joy in small acts of care. Her laughter returned, not every day, but often enough to remind her that healing was possible. The town prepared for the Harvest Festival, an annual gathering where stalls filled the square with jars of jam, loaves of bread, and handmade crafts. This year, The mayor asked Mira to speak about her garden program. At first, she wanted to refuse. The thought of standing before a crowd made her stomach twist. But when she looked at the children tugging at her apron, saying, "We can't wait to hear you talk," she found herself nodding. On the evening of the festival, the square glowed with lanterns and string lights. Sunflowers lined the wooden stage. Mira stood just behind the curtain, her hands trembling. She had always believed her voice was too small, too unworthy of attention. Now all eyes would turn toward her. She stepped out slowly. The crowd hushed. Faces she recognized filled the square. Nonna smiling warmly, Piper and Tom waving, townsfolk leaning forward with quiet expectation. And in the front row sat Rowan, his gaze steady, offering silent encouragement. Mira gripped the wooden podium and drew a shaky breath. "I used to believe," she began, "that people only saw what I was not. Not graceful enough, not small enough, not enough of anything." Her voice shook, but she pressed on. "For years I carried those voices inside me. They were heavy, louder than the truth." She paused, glancing at the children in the crowd. "Then someone handed me a packet of sunflower seeds. I planted them wrong, too close, too shallow. I was sure they wouldn't grow. But they did, not perfectly, but bravely, like they wanted to prove something." Soft laughter rippled through the listeners. Mira's voice grew steadier. "That garden taught me that growth isn't about being flawless. It's about showing up, even when you think you can't. It's about believing in what looks small and broken until it blooms." Applause rose gently, then stronger, sweeping through the square like wind through wheat. Mira stepped back, tears in her eyes. But before she could leave the stage, Rowan stood and walked forward. He carried a single sunflower in his hand. The crowd grew quiet as he climbed the steps. He looked at Mira with a mix of humility and hope. "You once told me you never thought you could make something beautiful," he said. "But Mira, you are the beauty you planted here. You gave this land and this town more than sunflowers. You gave us yourself." He held out a ring, woven from grass and twine, simple but strong. "I don't have diamonds," he said softly, "but I have love and a life I want to build with you. Will you share it with me?" Mira's breath caught. For a moment, the square felt utterly still. Then tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Yes." The crowd erupted with cheers. Lanterns swung in the breeze, children clapped, and Nona shouted with joy. Rowan slipped the ring onto her finger, and together they stepped down from the stage, hand in hand. But the story did not end with applause. In the weeks that followed, Mira and Rowan worked with the townsfolk to create something lasting. They built a seed library on the edge of the field, a small wooden shed filled with jars of saved seeds, sunflowers, herbs, vegetables. Anyone could take seeds. Anyone could plant hope. The first Saturday, families gathered at the farm to borrow seeds and share stories. Children painted signs, parents traded recipes, and neighbors spoke of dreams they thought they had lost. The field became more than soil. It became a place of belonging. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mira stood in the garden. Her father appeared at the edge of the lane, hat in hand, shoulders bent. His face was lined with regret. He did not speak at first, but when his eyes met hers, she heard the words he could not say. She stepped closer, placed a hand gently on his arm, and whispered, "I forgive you, not for you, but for me." His shoulders lifted slightly, and he nodded. It was not everything, but it was enough. That night, lanterns were lit across the field. Families placed them among the rows, small lights swaying above the flowers. Mira stood with Rowan at her side, their hands entwined, watching as the field filled with soft glowing stars. This was no longer a story of punishment or shame. It was a real-life journey of forgiveness, of hope, of transformation. The farm was alive, the people were connected, and Mira had found a place where she belonged. As the lanterns rose into the night sky, she whispered to herself, "Soil remembers. And in that moment, she knew her life had finally taken root in the richest ground of all, love. And so from a life once marked by shame, Mira found love, belonging, and a future rooted in hope. Remember, even the hardest soil can bloom with the brightest flowers. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories.